So, my experience as an American Jew. The reason I wanted to make this video today, of all days, as we say, was because of what happened in my hometown of Bloomfield, Michigan yesterday, and I'm going to be very honest, I know very, very few details of what happened. I've been working this week where I sort of work most of the day, from getting up at 5:15 to, when my day ends at somewhere around 9-10 once I'm finished uploading all my data. I'm in North Texas inspecting a wind turbine, basically a wind farm. If you hadn't figured out from the title, I'm a drone pilot, so that's what I do. But most of the time when I'm out working, sometimes I'm better than others, staying away from the news and not getting too dug into it. Obviously, I see the headlines like everyone else of what's going on, but I'm not spending hours on X, which I sort of did before the election. That was horrible. I try to sort of see the headlines. I might listen to a few things on YouTube here or there, but for the most part, I try to avoid it. And for the most part, my whole life I've not made a lot of political statements, and I don't intend for this to be a political statement really. But after what happened yesterday, I feel, I guess, obligated or compelled, whether through catharsis or whatever. I sort of woke up this morning at around 3:30, 4, and couldn't fall back to sleep, and I thought I should say something to, I guess ideally to prevent this from happening again, but I'm not naive enough to think that would somehow be in my power. I've thought about why I wanted to do something like this, and I guess other than, chasing clicks or whatever, which there is probably some part of me that has always wanted to have more of a digital presence or whatever. I don't know. So other than that, I guess the idea sounds nice of becoming popular on YouTube or whatever and not having to work 12 hours a day just so I can have a place to sleep and good food to eat. Seems like a good gig, although I'm sure it has its pitfalls. But so aside from that sort of, I guess, self-aggrandizement, why I wanted to make this video, and it'll be a longer video. I have sort of a lot on my mind I want to say. I guess I wanted to put a perspective or something out into the world that not only tells my story, but what in my experience, is the story of most American Jews. And I think it is totally contradictory to a lot of what is being spewed on the internet about what being a Jew in America is like and means, and how we think about the world. And I do believe that false impression of American Jewish life, which I was debating whether or not I would name names. I think I'll name names. When you have a guy like Tucker Carlson saying the word Chabad with as much venom in his voice as he could possibly muster. You can't help but connect that to the events of yesterday. It's just an unavoidable conclusion. That's not saying that Tucker drove that car into that building and packed it full of guns and packed that man's heart full of that intent to harm people. But you certainly can't say how didn't. You can't say he was trying to prevent anything like that, and it's hard to say how much this idea of Jews being primarily focused on specifically American Jews being primarily focused on the betterment of Israel and all that. I'd like to focus most of this. I kind of have a limited, I'm just driving back to my hotel, and once I get back to my hotel, I'll be done making the video, I think. But so I want to focus mostly on my experience and not too much on what's been put out into the world. But people know what I'm talking about, this idea that AIPAC runs the American government, etc., etc., etc. To me is so foreign to the majority of American Jews' beliefs, experiences. And so I wanted to share a bit of my background today. And I guess I'll start by talking a little bit about Temple Israel and my connection to it. So I've grown up my whole life in the Metro Detroit suburbs. I was born in Novi. My parents grew up in the Metro Detroit suburbs. We're a third generation immigrant family. So my grandfather was born in Detroit, Michigan, but his brothers were born in the old country, so to speak. Typical Ashkenazi background, some Russian ancestry, some Polish ancestry, depending on how you carve up the map at that time. But my great-grandfather fought in World War I for Russia, left because of pogroms through the town of Lodz, Poland. So, I mean, very typical Ashkenazi Jewish background that you'll hear about if you talk to Jews from New York, from Metro Detroit, from Philadelphia, from California, any of these places where there's a large concentration of American Jews. You'll hear similar stories to that around the turn of the century, a little after, our family started coming over to escape persecution. This is sort of the Fiddler on the Roof story. So back to Temple Israel, my connection to it. Having grown up in the area, we didn't belong there. We belonged to a few different other temples. So, but I mean, been to several bar mitzvahs there, different events. I mean, I've been to Temple Israel dozens of times probably just throughout the years for different things. Probably not 3 dozen, but probably 2 dozen. And just close personal friends who were there yesterday, right? Or sorry, I shouldn't say that. Close personal friends who knew people who were there yesterday. So sort of 1 degree of separation. My mom has a very good friend who works for the preschool, who, although I don't think she was working yesterday, but I mean, the point is that for this to happen this close to where I grew up, it hits very close to home and sort of has compelled me to want to break my silence on the state of the world, so to speak. And again, I don't think the best way for me to do that is to I really think the best way is to talk about my experience. So I guess some of the different things I want to talk about are how religious I am. And again, I really believe that I sit probably somewhere in the middle of the spectrum in terms of religiosity of American Jews. There are Jews who are certainly less religious, and they're probably, I would say maybe I'm on the more religious end of the sort of non-practicing Jewish spectrum. And the reason I say this in connection with Temple Israel is Temple Israel is not a Chabad house. It's pretty much the opposite of a Chabad house. These people saying that the Jewish cabal that runs the world are these, practicers of the Talmud. Temple Israel couldn't be further from that. It's essentially this anything goes, almost hippie-like perspective on Judaism. So I think when a place like that is attacked, when the insinuation is that there are these hyper-religious Jews who are trying to enforce the biblical prophecy of a greater Israel on the American government, to think that the people at Temple Israel are the people who hold those beliefs is so far from the truth it is almost unbelievable. So again, like many of the people at Temple Israel, I was raised at a Reformed temple. Went to Wednesday night school and Sunday school before my bar mitzvah. Since then, I haven't gone at all. I've never been to Israel. I hardly speak any Hebrew. I've sort of, once upon a time I could read it, but I certainly could not hold a conversation in Hebrew. I don't keep kosher. I had barbecue last night where I had pork sausage and pork ribs and brisket, which is beef, but then had mac and cheese. Now that being said, I'm interested in religious ideas. I've read the entire Torah in audiobook form, so not really reading, but I've listened to the entire Torah, so the 5 books of Moses. I've gotten through most of the Old Testament, or around half the Old Testament at this point. I sort of, when I'm driving for work, I'll just listen to it, and it's, certainly, at the very least, a window into the world that we live in, where all these events that are, well, on the surface, political, are at their core rooted in these religious systems and ideas. It's eye-opening, at least in that regard, and also you can't help but reflect on the nature of being listening to a book like that, and all those sorts of things that I've been interested in. I think one of the things that my Jewish experience has certainly included is this idea of scholarship and being a man of books and having books shape who you are and being a lifelong student and curious. I think perhaps that's an evil Talmudic idea, but that is certainly the impression that's been passed along to me by grandparents and my parents. I think another thing that's been passed along to me within the context of my Jewish family is the opposite of this idea of usury or And again, I say this because I really believe I have not met I've met some sort of these uber wealthy Long Island Jews I went to college at University of Michigan, also known affectionately by, and probably unaffectionately by some as Jewmish. So I had that experience and met lots of uber wealthy Long Island Jews. Where I'm from in Michigan, there's certainly plenty of uber wealthy Jews. And there's certainly a lot of Jews who aren't uber wealthy, just like the majority of the population. The majority of Jews are not uber wealthy. But I've met some of those people and those families who, whatever enterprise, or they've accumulated this sort of crazy wealth. None of those people I met are usurious, are these global banking elites. I see, my experience has been seeing sort of the Jamie Dimons of the world in the same way I see other people. I mean, you know, could you argue someone like Dan Gilbert, or who's sort of from my area? I played like basketball against his kid or whatever. I mean, they're usurious, sure. But at the end of the day, they're business people. But my experience has been the opposite of trying to take advantage of people, or instead you're taught in sort of religious school, but also just through family, and the example that has been set is that you are to do an honest day's work, and that you're to work extremely hard, and that you're not to be an idiot either about how you go about making a living, that you shouldn't slave away for no reason or without developing skills. But that has been a part of my Jewish American experience, but certainly not any idea that I should be taking advantage of people or anything like that. I mean, basically watch my dad. I like to talk about him and my grandpa a little bit and their experiences. My grandfather ran a drugstore for most of his adult life. He had American military service, and after that he had gone to pharmacy school. Then he was in the army. Both my grandfathers, both Jewish, served in the American military. You know, so my grandfather, my dad's side, owned a drugstore, worked extremely long hours, sort of had this mom and pop drugstore as a pharmacist, and turned it into this nice little business, and did well, and was able to put my dad through medical school. And I mean, there's family tragedy involved and all that, but my dad did that. My uncle went to law school, so sort of this stereotypical Jewish experience. And neither of them are. My uncle actually sues large corporations, and so it's like a class action lawyer. So in a sense, that's, I guess, the opposite of usury. Not saying he's a saint or anything, but I mean, again, and my dad's a cardiologist, and no, he does not, you know, he's not a lineman, he's not a construction worker, but by God, the guy works 80, 90-hour weeks since I can remember, and still does to this day, because I don't know if he knows how not to. He's trying to figure that out, but again, my experience seeing how American Jews have built their wealth, including especially my family, has been just pretty much hard work. And having family that is there and cares about you and wants to give you the opportunity, but I mean, and so then there's my personal experience where, yeah, my dad's done extremely well. In a sense, if they had wanted, then I wouldn't ever have to work a day in my life. Probably, yeah, that could have been the case. But that has not been the case. That has been about the opposite of the case, where despite troubles that I've had and all various adventures and misadventures, it has not been allowed for me to ride the coattails and live off of their success. Now, they've certainly helped in the ways they've felt comfortable and all that, sort of to play into the stereotype of, right, Jewish, how would you say, nepotism. But the fact is that I've had to work to have a decent life for myself, and that continues to this day, and once I get back to my hotel, that will continue. I will keep working, and I'll get up tomorrow and I'll work. And so again, that has been a huge part of my Jewish American experience, has been working hard, being educated. But I don't think my experience as an American Jew has been that of taking advantage of non-Jews. I have never in my life heard an American Jew utter anything like that except in sort of this self-effacing mockery. Now, the other thing I guess I wanted to talk about is what it's like as an American Jew in terms of fitting into society, what that was like as a kid and what that's like now. I think since October 7th, certainly I've been much more hesitant to tell people I'm Jewish. Definitely over the last year, that's felt at least worse. But as a kid, that was not so much the case. I was comfortable telling people I was Jewish. Where I went to school, I was never the only Jew, although there were other situations where I was certainly the only Jew, and that was eye-opening. So to share a couple of those experiences and what that was like, I played baseball as a kid with sort of this amalgamation from different towns throughout Oakland County, a lot of kids from Oxford and Clarkston, also kids who went to Brother Rice, but for most of it, I was the only Jew. I think for a couple years at the end, there was one other Jew on our team. And, you know, there was sort of a good-natured ribbing about it. I don't think... I do think that I felt as though I would never quite fit in as a Jew in certain scenarios, that if I had gone to one of these larger public schools, which I didn't, I went to, for people who know the area, Birmingham Public Schools until 6th grade, and then from there on I went to a school called the Roper School, which is sort of a unique place. To put it in context, it's sort of like a Brown University of, private schools within Michigan. There's places I would compare a place like Cranbrook that people have heard about from like the rap battles, and 8 Mile is always a good reference point. But that's sort of like Yale in terms of curriculum and outlook, and then Harvard would be a place like this Detroit Country Day School, and then Roper was sort of this quirky place like Brown, very small school. So I went there for high school. It was a very interesting experience. I guess I wanted to share the baseball stories because what that was like, because they were a lot of church-going Christian kids on my baseball team, and they would remember at different times they would question me about the beliefs of Judaism. And even at that point, us being 12, 13, 14, they sort of had these ideas of what it was like to be a Jew, and that I must be keeping kosher, and why I wasn't wearing a kippah, and it's almost this surprise at how quote-unquote assimilated I was in different scenarios. And I think for a lot of Jewish people it's like that. We're sort of trying to fit in, but then at the same token, it feels as though there's sort of no escaping the Jewish identity, right? If you're born Jewish, you don't believe in, you weren't raised to believe in Christ, although there's many Jews who have converted to Christianity. Famously, someone like Bob Dylan had sort of a Christian awakening period. Lots of examples like that. A Russian example would be Boris Pasternak. Very, very interesting writing on the subject of the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. The synopsis being that he basically thought that Jews should just convert to Christianity and stop sort of being holdouts and creating dysfunction in society. That is essentially, anyways, that's not what this video is about. But so I felt on that baseball team especially, I felt as I was an outsider. I think when I was in middle and high school, there were enough Jews around where it did not feel like that, where it was kind of within our friend group probably about 50-50, and so there was a lot of inner Jew banter and all that. But then sort of, for instance, just meeting girls who weren't Jewish, both when I was, before college and then at college, that felt like you're an outsider, that you're not fitting in. And I certainly got different reactions in that circumstance. But about 7 minutes left. I think in a lot of ways, I think, I have this Jewish identity, but my lifestyle, again, is this weird amalgamation of being an American as a kid, playing baseball, basketball, doing extremely American things, eating American food, obviously speaking English, all that stuff. And then there is this part where it's you have this curiosity, and then also this sort of feeling of my buddy saying hi, driving next to me. The guy who's been my wind turbine tech, who's been setting up the towers for me, this guy Raul from Spain, and he's going back to Spain tomorrow, so he's throwing a fiesta tonight. He just drove by me waving like a madman. But so there's just another aspect to life as an American Jew, where you don't feel like you fit in, and then also you don't share this common ground of Christianity. Although in some ways the schedule of your life is built around it, with Christmas break and spring break as Easter break and all. But that's, you don't, on Christmas Eve you eat Chinese food, sort of thing. It's this very strange thing to be an American Jew, but it is this balancing act between fitting in and maintaining that identity. I felt that growing up. The other aspect of my sort of education that I thought was very interesting in terms of being Jewish, obviously at the University of Michigan there's tons of Jewish people, and then there's also just people from all over the world, this incredible melting pot. And then there I studied ancient Greece and Rome, really, and learned about the ancient Jewish world as a part of that Greco-Roman world. Not so much at that point biblical history, but recorded history and how Jews factored into that, and seeing the parallels between then and now, and also the rise of Christianity and all of that. And it's fascinating to think how that affects our lives today, how those roots are part and parcel with all the conflict and everything. I mean, growing up both at Michigan and at home, having obviously, Dearborn, Michigan, and also in West Bloomfield and other places in the area, there's not only a large Jewish population, then there's a large Arab population, where, I mean, barring yesterday's incident, a great degree of cohesion and at least living side by side in peace and under the law. And I guess I should wrap things up because I'm going to be back soon. I guess I wanted to share a little bit of my history, and again, it's in the hopes really that people can hear this, and when they think about their fellow citizens as living in America who are Jews, that they don't think of whatever this idea that is being portrayed as these bad actors who are anti-American. I can only speak for myself, but I certainly feel that the children who would have been massacred at Temple Israel yesterday, if the perpetrators had been a little more competent or a little more, I guess a little more competent and perhaps not acting by themselves. But I mean, I doubt many of those kids would have been raised to be anything other than Americans who wanted to fit in and be Americans as their primary identity, like me. I mean, where to me it's, I guess, yeah, I want Israel to exist. I don't want a bunch of Jewish people to get like wiped from the face of the earth, but really, I just want to live my life as an American and raise a family in America and have a family that enjoys the same freedom and prosperity that I've enjoyed, and pass that along to my offspring. I mean, that would be. And now again, I trust me, I'm aware that there are more religious Jews who went to religious day schools and, in New Jersey and in New York, and I'm aware of who Jared Kushner is and what his religious background and upbringing is, and yes, I am aware of. I know what AIPAC is. I know what but I'm also aware that the people who were in the crosshairs yesterday are not that. That they, well, for one, were children, or are children, still are children, thankfully. But that really, that those people's identities throughout their lives would be as American Jews, probably more so than Jewish Americans, if that makes sense. Of course, there would be this, I think it's probably a similar, although I don't know this for sure, but obviously it's not the same in many ways, but I guess anyone who lives in America, who's Indian, who's black, who's Chinese or Korean or take your pick, probably Native American, anyone who's sort of not a good old boy going to church on Sunday has this experience of being something other than just American. But I do think that the point of America is that we are all American, and we can all be individuals who contribute to society, and our differences can make us stronger somehow. I think that was all instilled in me in sort of this, wide-ranging education that I had that went from some Jewish education to a very strong, great books education, which of course the Western canon is by and large Christian. I mean, it's Judeo-Christian, but I mean, from Ernest Hemingway, who some people consider an anti-Semite, who I basically is the first author I really fell in love with, to Dostoevsky, to Victor Hugo. I mean, all these writers are obviously Christian, and their writing and outlook has informed me perhaps more than anything else. These great authors, most of them Christian. Again, Pasternak sort of being this weird example of a Jew who became Christian. I mean, different American singers and songwriters I think of who have informed my perspective. But again, I guess why I wanted to make this video is as a reminder, or a reminder to my fellow Americans that American Jews are Americans, and for the most part we're raised believing in this country. We're raised believing in the ideas of our founding, or not to get too grandiose about it. I see everything. I understand why people are so skeptical. It's funny, my mom My mom was going to take some trip to Egypt and decided she's not going to go on the trip because, well, to be quite frank, probably because her and probably my dad, to an extent, have remarkable TDS and think that either he's going to bomb them or the Iranians are going to bomb them in Egypt, and or my mom in Egypt. And there's a level 2 warning by the State Department, which is lower than I think after October 7th. But so she basically said, I don't trust the government's rating or whatever. And so I was like, oh, you're starting to sound a little like Alex Jones now or whatever. But I'm aware of the skepticism and to what extent we're fulfilling our founding principles these days. But I guess I wanted to make this video so when people are thinking about shooting up the synagogue the next time, they can, especially if they're also Americans, which it sounds like this guy either was an American or wanted to be an American. I don't know I have not been paying attention to the very specifics of all of it, but it sounds like he was a guy from Dearborn, basically. Spent quite a bit of time there, actually. One of my first jobs in the drone world was teaching. I taught about drones in different schools throughout Detroit. Most of them were Detroit public schools, but one of them was this. This is a good, I'll end with this story, I guess. This will be a good bit of my experience to, I guess, end this video on. And so I taught these different drone classes to all different age groups throughout Detroit, and mostly Detroit public schools. But one place I taught at was a private Arab day school, essentially. I think it was K through 12, but I was teaching basically elementary school and maybe a few middle school. I think elementary and middle school, so like 4th through 8th grade, let's say. I was teaching them different stuff about drones. I did not tell them I was Jewish. I think that would not have been a good idea. It could have caused distracted from the learning environment. I mean, remember one time a girl was telling me about how her uncle was telling her all about the different 9/11 conspiracy theories, and that was absolutely hysterical. They were telling me, I think a lot of them were Syrian, and they were telling me about their experiences going back to Syria and Lebanon. And that's where I grew up. I mean, I'd like to think, and it was honestly, it was one of the best experiences I had. I mean, that school was incredibly well run. The kids were great. I mean, it was just, it was every time I went there, it was a pleasure. I would go to get some really, really good, Syrian food. I think it was probably, it's hard to say, but, Middle Eastern food, whatever it was. And in Dearborn Heights, it was just, I would pretty much every time I would go to those places called like Suge Market, or I think Saj Market. Yeah, it's been a while, but just spectacular food. And I think that's what most of us want, is that to be able to happen. I think we're getting further from that. I don't think yesterday helped, but I guess I wanted to make a video and hope that people can recognize that perhaps before they act out of hate, that most of I would say probably most Jews worldwide, but definitely American Jews that I've met and myself just want a chance to live the American dream, to be a part of this melting pot of a society. That's what we want. We don't want to run the world. We don't want, I certainly don't. Sounds like a massive headache, quite frankly, but yeah, I think I'll end it there. I hope I've communicated what I'm trying to communicate, but I'll leave it there. Take care, everyone.